So a few years ago, I told a story of the 10 cars I regret selling most. And in that time, we've probably sold another 200 cars through Curated. And I would say that regret has only grown more. So I am going to tell you the new list of the 10 cars I regret selling most. Probably on top of that list is one of the most incredible Miuras I have ever seen. And actually, a ton of experts didn't even believe it was real. This was a Survivor Miura SV that had never been shown. It had never been publicly offered, and this car had 10,000 original miles. Original paint, original interior, original tires. It was a complete time capsule, and it's sort of a weird story, but I had actually chased this car for a few years, and then one day, I woke up and I called a colleague and I said, hey, whatever happened to that car? And he said, it's been owned by the same doctor for like 20, 25 years. The reason he doesn't drive it, the reason he hasn't done anything with it is he's just too tall for the car, but he loves the car. We called the doctor that day. We caught him on a bad day and we ended up making a deal. I think he regretted it within 24 hours later. He actually tried to buy the car back. And I just begged him. I'm like, please, I have to be involved with this car. Please let me sell this car. And it ended up going to an incredible collection now of all original cars. But I think, after bringing in my dad, after bringing in Andrew Romanowski, a few major guys that know these cars came and inspected the car, and they were just shocked. Literally everything was untouched. You could see the brush marks in the original black accents. You could see all these things that you'll never see again. And it was actually very nice condition. It wasn't like, barn find or anything. No, this car was really loved. So, number one, definitely the Miura SV Survivor. Number two is a car that I was actually scared of buying at first. It was the original, one of two, Miami Vice Testarossas. Now, these cars were given basically by Ferrari to Ferrari North America and then on loan to the production studio. And they had all the original paperwork and documents. They were actually metallic black cars with cream. And then, because the director, producer didn't like how they looked on camera, they were immediately repainted white. They were used famously in the shows. One of the cars, immediately after filming, was sold to Preston Henn. Preston Henn, famous collector, God rest him. He had one of the most incredible collections, $100 million Ferrari, and it sat in his collection until 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was. We had chased the car. The car needed a little work. It was old paint, old interior, and I just wasn't sure really what the market could bear. I made a verbal agreement with a friend, and I said, listen, this is what I'm buying the car for. You can have it at this price. Just let me market it and advertise it. I think it'll be cool. And immediately when I put it on Instagram, we didn't even have a signed deal yet. He hadn't even paid for the car, and the car exploded. I got offers from around the world. I mean, offers we're talking $1 million, 1.2, 1.5 million. And I pretty much freaked out. I held to my word. I did the right thing. I gave him the car at the deal we agreed on, but it's a huge regret considering that the risky business Porsche 928 sold for almost $2 million. Don't want to talk about that anymore. Next subject. Car number three has to be probably one of the most famous modern Lamborghinis ever. When you think about it, every time I post this car, talk about this, everyone comments on our Instagram saying, I had this car as a screensaver. I remember this car, and it's the famous Murcielago RGT show car. This was the Frankfurt Motor Show car. It was famous press photos of this black sort of image in this black background with this big wing, full carbon body car. The car was deemed too radical by the FIA, so it was actually never used. It's a brand new car. The motor was sitting next to it, and it was basically on display in the factory museum forever. We were very lucky enough to purchase it from a collector about 2 years ago, and the car will be coming back to the States and joining an incredible collection. I don't think you could ever duplicate this again. Most of the factory prototypes were actually sold to one major collector who will donate them back to his own museum. So to find a Lamborghini prototype show car, one-off, you can't duplicate it today. They're going to be sitting in a museum. So this is a museum piece. I think it's a priceless car today, and definitely one I regret. The next car is another factory museum car. I don't even know how we got this car. I actually didn't even believe it when I heard it was available. Came from another great collector. It was the one-of-one Diablo GT2. Now, this is the only factory works racing Diablo ever made. There were other Diablo, racing projects. They had the SVR cars, but they weren't like a true GT racer. It was a spec series. They had the GTR cars. That was a spec series car. This was made to go race in GT racing at Le Mans and all the big endurance races. The other cars were just basically Lamborghini's, supplied engines and other people did the bodywork. This was developed in-house at Lamborghini and a one-off car. It was the first Diablo to have the 6-liter engine ever. It was the first Diablo, if you notice, to have these open headlights, so the famous Nissan 300ZX headlights. And it's the first Diablo to have GT styling. So it has the GT front hood. It was the first Diablo to have that. Very cool car. They used it for testing for about, 6-7 months. They raced it twice. In France, unfortunately, it didn't do too well. I think it placed 7th. And then the car was modified. They changed the front bumper. They changed the rear hood scoops. And then for some reason, the project was canceled and it sat in the factory museum from 1998 until 2015, where it was sold to a collector and we had the opportunity to buy it. It's actually available right now at Curated. I can't afford it. I'd love to keep it. It's a piece of history. It's probably one of the last factory museum cars that someone could actually buy. So if a McLaren F1 GTR today is $30-something million, this is way more special, built by a company with way more resources at the time, and this is a one-of-one car, so I think it's absolutely priceless. The next car was a huge blunder on my part. We were chasing a few years ago, with the help of Steven and the guys from Blue Ridge, an AMG Hammer in silver. Now, I didn't really know much about the car, just besides it had high miles and it needed a lot of work. And we believed it was the cover of Car and Driver or Road and Track at the time. So we get the car in, we look over the car, it needs everything. And one day I get a call from a gentleman saying that, he was one of the former owners of the car and he'd love to buy the car back. He remembered getting a ride in it as a kid and blah, 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 all these different stories. And just felt like, okay, it was the right people to sell it to. So we made a small profit and I sold the car and was really excited for him because the more research I did, I found out that yes, it was the Car and Driver car and it was the Road and Track car. And then about a year later, he's restoring the car at Rentec. And Rentec is led by Hartmut, who Hartmut was one of the original AMG mechanics who brought AMG to the US, and he was basically working on all the cars. And he says, oh yeah, that silver AMG Hammer you had, that's the prototype that I hit 300 kilometers per hour with. I said, what? He said, yeah, that was Mr. Offrich's personal car. Oh. He goes, yeah, that car was his daily driver in Germany. That was the prototype. And the reason I could tell was because on only that car, I had to put sheets, like a flat bottom on the car to hit 300 kilometers per hour. And I remember I created like this little device to close the front grille. I saw my old workings underneath the car, and that was the world record car in the prototype. I think the owner was recently offered $1 million. He turned it down, and I don't want to tell you guys what I sold it for. Since we have been buying Murcielago manuals and chasing the cars, Ed's done an incredible job at documenting the cars. We've tried to chase every car that exists and buy them. They're just so incredibly rare. And when you think about Ferrari production and Porsche Carrera GT production and all these iconic manual cars, the LP640 is probably the rarest of all supercars. And when you think of their prices historically between $300,000 and $600,000, it just didn't make any sense. And these cars now, one recently traded for $1.3 million. Sort of makes sense now. Looking back, we've had some of the best LP640 manuals that existed. We had Ed's green car. We had the gold coupe. We had the green roadster. We had an orange coupe. We had a yellow coupe. On and on and on and on. We've had probably 8 or 9 of these cars. I think maybe 10 of these cars. And I know I'm going to regret selling all of them. This is the last generation of V12 manual cars that exist. They're very reliable cars. The service costs are not that expensive, and they're fun. They're awesome. They're just so good looking. I think the styling is completely timeless. I could go on and on and on. I regret selling all of them. So much so that I've bought one, and I'm not going to tell anybody about it until a special story comes out. Stay tuned. So when you think about Ferrari production, Ferrari produced a lot more cars than a lot of the Lamborghini deals that we deal in. You think, F40 production, they built close to 1,300 cars for the world, and they're basically all red. So, imagine when you think about special F40s, there's not that many cars. Now you have sliding window, the early plexiglass cars that are non-cat, non-adjust. My favorite, it's the way that they were originally thought of by Enzo Ferrari himself, probably the most radical cars, and there's less than 100 believed in the world today. Then you have the US cars, so there's probably like 230, I think, US cars. But at the end of the day, that's still a lot of cars produced. So when you think of unique F40s, what's the best? And when I think of unique F40s, I think of Nigel Mansell's personal F40. Now, it's not like he bought this car used and he used it. No. Nigel Mansell was the last Formula One driver to be hired by Enzo before Enzo Ferrari's death. He was well received by the Italians and the Formula One fans, and he actually won his first Formula One race in Brazil on the first F1 transmission F1 cars ever built. This was a huge success, and at the same moment, I think it was within the same week, Ferrari delivered him a brand new Ferrari F40, a plexiglass window car that he famously drove it all over England, drove it all over Europe, and then later, when he would leave Ferrari, he actually went to sell the car. He didn't just sell it to one person. He actually sold it to two people, apparently, at the same time, and it was involved in this crazy lawsuit. There was tons of articles about it. He sold it to one guy for like $600,000, then he sold it to another guy for like $1 million. It was this whole disaster. Regardless, it's a famous car. We sold it to an incredible collector, but today, I really believe it's one of the coolest F40s in the world, and I regret selling it. So as a kid, I always remember this crazy Diablo SE30 Jota, as I've talked about before on Curated TV and this channel. SE30 Jotas are like this ultimate unicorn. I mean, there was really only 26 probably cars ever built. Of that, 16, 17 at the factory, and they're the highest horsepower of any Diablo. I mean, it's like, McLaren F1 status for a Lamborghini, really. We had the opportunity to buy, at the time, a very storied, a very high mileage rough, but probably one of the most famous SE30 Jotas in the world. This was the London Motor Show car that was actually unveiled the same time that Lamborghini unveiled the Cala, which was the failed V10 project. So the two cars were together at the London Motor Show. It was the press car. It was famously used in UK press. There's actually a famous press release featuring the car. There's famous photos of the car at the factory, and it is a one-of-one spec. Yellow outside, yellow and blue interior, yellow gauges with yellow wheels. It doesn't get more absurd than that. It's so Lamborghini. It's so insane. And the car was actually used for posters as well. It was actually a famous poster car. They made models of it. We had the opportunity to buy it. I felt like the car was owed some respect. It had been driven a lot. It needed some love. So we sent it back to Italy to Cremonini and Top Motors to do it everything. The car will be finished in about a month. It was, unfortunately for me, sold about a month ago. I'm excited for the new owner. He's going to get a brand new piece of history. So we had a few years ago a collection of cars called the Time Capsule Collection. And it was all one owner, no mileage. Perfect cars. They were delivered new to the heir to Mr. Coffee, the percolating coffee pot. And somehow these cars were incredibly well preserved. Part of the collection was probably the best LM002 Lambo truck that I have ever seen in my life. It is not just any LM002, it was Bianco Perlato, so pearl white over full red leather, original tires, 1,000 original miles, an American version, and still had plastic wrappers on the seats from Lamborghini when the car was new. Original radio. I mean, the car was just insane. It smelt new when you got in the car. Original paint. Everything was perfect about it. And to find a Lambo truck in that condition is completely impossible. You won't do it. You won't find it. It's not the most expensive car we've ever sold, but it's definitely one of the most rare. I definitely regret selling the LM. So when you think about the recent Ferrari Enzo sales, Enzos have been selling between 3.5 and well over $4 million. So when you think about Enzo production, they actually produced way more than the original production amount. So there's probably like 550 or something, maybe 600 Enzos in the world. So they're actually not that rare, but an incredible supercar from Ferrari. When you think about rare Enzos, what do you think about? You think about the Maserati MC12 and the Ferrari Enzo FXX race car. Now, we had the opportunity to purchase 2 MC12s. This was at a time when they were trading between 2 million and 2.5 million. And when you think of a car that's basically an Enzo, that a roof comes off of, less than 50 in the world, was a no-brainer. I couldn't afford it. It's definitely a keeper. If you're a collector with one, just put it away. And then we recently purchased a Ferrari FXX. This is a one-of-one color FXX Evo. Forget the fact that it was a one-off color, 1 of 30 for the world. And imagine, this is basically a bigger horsepower, badass race car Enzo that some guys have driven on the street. I'm not saying it's legal, but some guys have. This is a no-brainer, and I think it's the coolest thing to be part of the XX Corsa Clienti program. Imagine you're racing with a bunch of major Ferrari collectors, racing their F1 cars, and you're racing an Enzo race car. The one thing I'm learning is, yes, the cars are so rare, we sort of know where they all are, but when certain colors or certain conditions come to market, you sort of know it's irreplaceable. You'll never be able to buy that again. It'll never be repeatable again. And some of these cars, they go into collections for, these are 80s and 90s cars, so they're going to a younger generation of the next generation of collectors, and these guys probably won't sell them for 30, 40, 50 years. I've brought major offers back to many of these cars and collectors and said, hey, would you sell? And people just don't want to. Many of the passionate collectors today, they understand rarity, they understand just how hard it is to duplicate a one-off color LP640, or how hard it is to duplicate a factory museum car. If they don't need the money and they're in love, why would they sell? None of the buyers of these cars need the money, and probably not for the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And the reality is, I've offered many of these guys sometimes 50%, 100%, double what they paid, and they've refused. So the reality is, these cars will probably be out of circulation for many, many years, and especially when it comes to some of the rare Lambos, there's just nothing left.
Whether you see the car in person or buy it sight unseen, when you buy a pre-owned car, you need to get an inspection done by a qualified professional. And the nationwide network of trained inspectors from the Lemon Squad is the best way to accomplish that. They give you a great deal and a great bit of information about any car you're looking at very quickly. They've been supporting VINwiki now for 2 years, and I use them personally because when I'm buying a car, I need to know the full story. So check them out now at the link in the description below and use the code VINwiki for 10% off, and never buy a used car without the Lemon Squad.